Hello there. Today I'd like to talk to you about drawing in PathTrace. In previous videos we've looked at designing mats in Mat Designer and then taken them into PathTrace to modify. With drawing in PathTrace you're creating something entirely new. It's a topic a lot of framers want to know more about, but also one that's pretty intimidating. I'm going to take you through the basics step by step, and I think you'll find that once you know the basics and practice a bit, it's really not that difficult. Of course, our customers don't need to know that. So when do you use this? It's great when you have an object to be framed and you want to follow its outline with a mat opening, like this patch or the guidon. Doing this is a bit more custom and more interesting than a thing sitting on a mat. You may want to cut a logo in a mat within the bounds of copyright law, of course. Maybe this cross-country logo on a team photo, or the NASA logo debossed on a mat for an autographed astronaut's photo. The artwork you're framing could have an irregular shape you want to follow, like this cross embroidery. Once you learn this part of the software, you'll see all sorts of possibilities. The software also has a lot of options for cut art, but maybe not the exact one you'd like. You can draw and save your own custom cut art, which you can then use anytime you want. Before we dive in, you might want to see if you can do the job without PathTrace. There are some things that might seem complex, but can be done with a standard template, like this guidon. Template 507, the pennant, can be adjusted to fit a guidon like this one or a pennant. For this hexagonal patch, template 506, the star, can be used. In parameters, set the pointiness to 0 and then adjust the size and rotate. This can be used for any regular polygon like an octagon or a pentagon. Clip art is a perfect starting point for creating your own cut art. The shapes are usually pretty simple, so they're easy to work with and should cut well without a lot of modifications. Black and white clip art is the easiest to work with because of the clear lines and high contrast. A simple Google search will usually turn up what you need. Just type in the subject followed by clip art, and you might also want to include black and white. A lot of school logos can be found in clip art or something very close. Now this is mainly for elementary, middle, or high school. University logos are usually pretty specific, not to mention the copyright issues you might run into. Once you have your clip art, you can just put it on a flash drive to load onto the Wizard computer. With an object or artwork you want to draw out, you need to get a good picture to work with. You may be able to scan it, otherwise you'll need to get a good picture of it to work with. When you take the picture, make sure it's taken straight on so that the shape isn't distorted. My iPhone's camera has a crosshair on it that turns a solid color when it's level, and most other phones have a similar feature. And by the way, your phone's camera will be perfectly fine for this. Just make sure you use a background with good contrast so you can clearly see the edges. And then put the picture on a flash drive, and then we can get started. So now you've taken a picture of the artwork, or you scanned it and you have it on a flash drive. Now let's take it into PathTrace so that we can work with it. In the previous versions of the software, you couldn't go straight to PathTrace. So here's what you would do, is go to a new mat design, and we're just going to cancel out of that. We don't want to do anything in Mat Designer here. And we'll go to the cut screen, and then go into PathTrace from there. In the newer version of the software, it's a little bit easier because on the main menu here, we can go straight into Trace. Okay. In the previous versions of the software, again, it's a little bit different. Under the Trace and Draw tab, there is a button over here somewhere that says Load Image, and you would click that. In the newer software, it's under the Vectorize tab, and I'm not going to get into the Vectorize very much right now, except for this, because it really deserves its own completely separate video. So here we are, the Load File Image, and you would just simply select the image that you want to work with and open it, and there we are. And over here on the right hand side, there is the dimensions of the image, and I always like to make that a little bit larger. It's better to work large and create a large image, and then when you're actually cutting it, you're going to bring it down in size. It always seems to work better to go that way rather than doing a small image and trying to make it larger when you're cutting it. Okay, before we get started, there is the opacity over here, and this just adjusts the opacity. And I like to bring it down to about there. It just makes it easier to see the lines as I'm tracing it. If I have it very dark like that, it just doesn't show up very well when I'm tracing out my lines. Okay, there we go. So that's about where I want it. And before I get started tracing out this image, let's take a look at your drawing tools here. You've got 6 different options here, and just select the one that you want to use, and we'll start with a line, and just click where you want to start your line, and you'll see it draws it out. And whenever you get to the point where you want to stop, just click it again. And it's still drawing a line that's connected to your previous line. So if you're drawing out, a square or something, you can just keep on going until you're all the way done. And once you reach the end and you're finished, hit the escape key to stop drawing. Okay, let's just get rid of that real quick. Now, when you're drawing lines, a lot of times you might be tracing out something with squares, rectangles, something like that, and you want to be able to draw a line that's perfectly straight, horizontal, or vertical. And it can be done, but you're never absolutely sure whether it truly is horizontal or not. There's a great easy way around that. If you hold down the Control key, it takes you into what's called the Orthographic Mode. And now you can only draw a horizontal or vertical line, or a 45 degree. But there's no guesswork there. And again, when you reach the end, just click, and your line is drawn, and you can hit escape if you're done with that. Okay, so that's that. That'll make things quite a bit easier for you. Okay, let's erase that. Okay, the next option is an arc, and don't confuse it with a curve. The arc is a section of a circle, and to use the arc, just click at your beginning point, and then you'll click at your midway point, and then click your end point, just like that. And just like the line, it will continue to draw, just like that. And hit escape to end. Okay, get rid of that. Okay, and the curve, well, it draws curves. And these are curves that are not necessarily a part of a circle. Just start here, and then as you're going along, click on the various parts as you're going along, and when you reach the end, hit escape. And it may not be perfect to begin with, but let me show you. If you go to Edit, and this is true of any of these options here, when you go to Edit, when your cursor gets near one of these points, there's a beginning point, an end point, and 2 along the middle. It turns into a hand and then this little crosshair. And if you click on that dot, it allows you to move those around. And this is great for doing kind of the fine-tuning and getting things exactly where you want them to be. Okay, let's get rid of that. And you have an option to draw an oval, just like that, and click to end. And if you want to make a circle, hold down the Control key while you're doing that. And that will ensure that you get a perfect circle, and then click when you reach the end. Oops. Okay. And you have options for polygons, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided, and so on, for triangles, squares, rectangles, etc. Just like that. And you have also options for drawing out stars. I can't imagine when you would be using these a lot, but you have that option. Okay, so there are your basic drawing tools. And keep in mind, don't get too intimidated when you're looking at a pretty complex shape that you're drawing out, because you should remember that everything can be broken down into lines, arcs, and curves. Everything is some combination of those. All right, so let's go through and trace out this patch. And don't worry about all of the stuff in the center. Let's just assume that we're going to cut an opening to follow the shape of the outside of this patch that you might be framing. Okay, so let's go to Draw. And let's start with these parts up here. And we can't really be sure that these are actually arcs. Not completely sure that they're sections of a circle. So instead, I'm going to use the curve because that gives me more flexibility if I need to make any fine adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to start right here. And I'm going to click in a couple of places as I go along. And there we go, up to that top point there. And it's still connected and it's still drawing. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the second part over here. And when I reach the end, I'm going to hit Escape. Okay, and you see here, it doesn't perfectly match up, but that's okay. We can go into Edit and kind of just drag those lines a little bit and do some fine tuning and get them right where we want them to be. Okay, just like that. And that's pretty good right there. And we'll just fine tune that a little bit. And there we are. Okay, now I'm going to do these straight lines down on either side. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and this is really helpful when you're working with a lot of small little sections here. And let me show you something. I want to draw a line, and I need it to connect right there. And you can kind of guess, you can do it by eye and try to get it as close as you possibly can to connect. But when I zoom in, you see it's not actually connecting. And it does need to connect because otherwise when you try to join this together, the Wizard software isn't going to recognize it, even with that tiny little gap. So here's what you can do instead that will make sure that it's lined up and connected perfectly with that end point. Let me zoom in a little bit more here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go to Line. And I'm going to get my cursor fairly close to that end point. It doesn't have to be exact at all, but close. And I right click. And when you right click, it automatically joins up with that end point. And remember, if I hold down the Control key while I'm drawing a line, it will be perfectly straight up and down or horizontal. Okay, then right click again, hold down the Control key, and click, and then Escape to stop drawing that line. Okay. And right click to join up to the end of that line right there. And there we go. And this is a straight line right here. And I'm going to go back to Curve, and again, right click to join that up. And since I'm still drawing a curve, I can just keep on going until I reach the end right there. Okay, Escape to stop drawing. And we're almost done, just need a line right there. Okay, Escape, Curve, and click a couple of times, and then right click to join up right there. Okay, so there we go. So the only thing left to do is go to Edit, and then just kind of drag these points a little bit and get them where you want them. And I'm going to try to be, fairly precise. But you know, it kind of reaches the point where you have to decide if it's perfect enough. Because keep in mind that you're zoomed in really close and you're looking at things that are very, very fine. And once they're actually cut, you're probably looking at something that might be, you know, say 4 inches wide. And any little discrepancies that you might have here might end up being a difference of, you know, a 32nd of an inch or something like that. So you kind of, like I said, you kind of have to decide when it's perfect enough. There we go. All right, and sometimes this doesn't seem to behave. It's being a little bit naughty. Okay, all right, so we're just going to call that good enough for purposes of demonstration. Okay, there we go, and let's just drag that and get that where it wants to be. Okay, and let's call that done. Okay, not too bad. So right now, we have a whole bunch of different lines, and we need to join them all up so that the wizard can start cutting somewhere and just go all the way around in one continuous cut. And right now we just have a bunch of lines. So the easiest way to join those up is to go to Edit and Autojoin Segments. And now when I put my cursor on here, the entire thing turns white, and that tells me that everything is joined up. In the previous versions of the software, you would do that. You would click on Autojoin Segments and then right-click on this, and it would turn into a heavy black line. Okay, and one last thing, and this is kind of a fine point, but it's important. Whenever you're joining lines, especially a straight line joining up to a curve, there's going to be a little bit of a disjoint. You know, it may not be 100% smooth, and you can see here when I zoom in really, really close, it goes here and then there. And the wizard has to make a decision as it's cutting along here. At some point, it's going to have to lift up the blade, turn it, and plunge it back into the mat. And you probably don't want that to happen here because you're going to get a little jag. This should be a nice, smooth, long, continuous line. So there's the function down here, the Tangify, and that will smooth things out. And I like to set that at about 20. And watch what happens here when I click on the Tangify. There you go. You see how that kind of smoothed that out a little bit? It did move that line a little bit, but it smoothed it out quite a bit. And let's undo that and go over here and see what happens. Okay, same thing. You see how it's nice and smooth now. And it did move it out a little bit. But maybe if I just drag those points, I can drag it back in to that line a little bit. Okay, and just for fun, hit Tangify again, and it really wants to be out there. Okay, so here's what I can do probably is just move that out a little bit over there. There we go, perfect. And Tangify one last time just for good measure. Okay, there we go. And now before you can use this, we need to set the bevel and tell the wizard how we're going to cut that and save it. So let's just go up to Set Bevels here, and we'll click on that. And over here, we'll click on 45-degree bevel, and it turns that blue, and it's done. Okay. Now to be able to use this, we need to save it as a cut art file. So just go up to File, Save Path, Save Cut Art, and give it a name and save it. Okay, yes, I want to replace that. Okay, so that's the basics there, and in some subsequent videos, we'll go back and take a closer look at some of these editing options and how to use the cut art and some of the other functions. But for the basics, that's pretty much it. So that's all I have for you in this video. We'll see you later.